How can listeners kind of go about those first steps of trying to figure out, well, then who actually am I?
Yeah, no, this is like something, it's interesting, same thing. Cause I always ask people to, when I first go with them, I'm like, what do you think purpose is? What is that to you? And I get all these different variety of answers. Like some people think it's the check marks. Oh, it's the next goal I'm trying to reach. Or like you said, oh, it's the next, it's who I aspire to be or something like that. And it's like, I have to sit back with them like, no, this is your compass of who you are and who you've always been.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James, and I've got a very, very exciting guest for you today. Today, I've got Dr. Esther Zeledon, and she is a master of making dreams work. Her pioneering work as an international diplomat, scientist, and life coach have proven to work for people of all cultures across communities, corporates, and countries. Dr. Esther has created a formula for balancing success and brilliant productivity that everyone can use to create a limitless life. What a fantastic intro to this. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So, Dr. Esther, how are we?
I'm good. How are you? I'm so excited to be here.
Honestly, I've been doing my research into you, and I love your energy straight away. Like on your social media, you and your husband, like the energy is fantastic. I'm not doing the
Awesome.
research into the topic that we're talking about. It's something that I'm very, very curious about. So, can you just take my audience back into like what actually got you into this space? Because again, you're a doctor, like you seem to have had a great career. So, what actually led you down this path of the journey that you're on right now?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's always been who I am. So like I think again, in middle school, I used to help elementary school kids, in high school, middle school kids, and as a professional, I always was a coach. Like it was something like I always did and found ways. But then, the pressure like of society was like you need to reach all these different check marks, right? They had this definition of what success meant. So even though that I was doing, right, always coaching and helping people reach their own potential, I had the pressure to be like, I need to have financial stability. I need to make all these check marks. I need to have this type of title. And so I still ended up, even though, my body was pulling me one way, I was still kind of like, I need to meet these things. I need to be best in my class. I need to get this full scholarship. I need to go to college. I need to have this job and I need to do this. But, it starts to catch up with you. And, at some point, I realized that, when I was working with, and as I got into like the international development space, and diplomat, I was like, I went from just in the helping people to helping organizations, to helping NGOs, to helping countries. And I was like, the problem is all the same. At the end of the day, we weren't making this huge difference in places because people were coming in with their own idea of what people should do. They were like going to countries and places and going, you need this solution, and this is going to change you, and this is going to grow your place, your community, and this, without asking them what they wanted. And then when I would push them and be like, why don't we ask them what they want and fund that? I would get this uncomfortableness going, I don't even know how to listen to them because no one's ever listened to me. How can I help someone else when I don't even know what it is that I want or what I need? So that then like really like, so we have a bigger problem in this world, right? Where so many people have been doing what everyone else is doing that no one knows how to ask really what anyone else wants. So it's a bigger like feedback loop. So then I was like, okay, as I sat there with all these check marks and I had reached and broken the glass ceiling, I found myself, like a lot of my clients do, stuck and unfulfilled. And I start to feel it like in my body and health. And it was like the moments that I would find fulfillment was when I was helping people in the coaching, and the other moments was everything else in my life. And I was like, I need to make a change. It's like, if I'm helping other people, I need to be that example and do it myself. And so I was like, okay, that's it. I'm changing my life. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do this the whole time. And it was scary. It was really scary, but it was the best decision I made because I followed my alignment. I started living what was true to me and my purpose and making that impact and having that legacy that I really wanted, which was really to help people have the opportunity to live and like financially live off their purpose.
I love that. And like I said, you've already, we've only just started and there's so many directions we can go here. Can I just quickly sort of take it back to that,
Of course.
that diplomatic setting? Because there's some really interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
Where basically you've got a room full of people that basically are trying to help other people.
Yep.
And then you sort of then question them. And the fundamental thing is they can't figure out themselves like what they need themselves. So when you've then said, oh no, like what do they want? Why do you think that's such a big thing? Because for me, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking these people are on an international level. They're going into other countries, dealing with large sums of money. It seems quite logical to me to be like, well, what do they need? And then we'll deliver it. Why do you think that there's such an issue with people, especially in these higher end positions? I know it's for all walks of life, where they've got such an inability to ask themselves what they need. Like, where's that coming from? Because I said, you suggested it and it was met with like a brick wall. Like, why do you think that is?
Because in society, we're taught, right, that we are labeled by our like technical expertise, right? And so you learn it. Let's say like you can be a water specialist or an election specialist, let's say, or pick any type of sphere, right? Any type of subject. That's what we're taught to value, right? Our technical expertise. If you notice, like, and everyone's will be like, well, this person has a title or engineer, anything. And so we're taught, we study it, we know it. And it's true, you know the technicalities of it, right? And you study that. But there's a whole other level. Just because the data and the research might say that a place needs it, it might not be the first thing that the people want to address. I can even give you an example of Dominican Republic. Like all studies show that, they need water and sanitation, right? If you come here on vacation, you can't drink from the pipe. You got to drink bottled water. But for the people who live in the country, and I could testify, like I lived a long time, like you have a whole system of bottled water and filtration. You don't see it as a need because you have a system that handles it. So that's the disconnect, right? So then if the research shows it, right, these technical experts come in and be like, I'm going to put all this money in, and put it into water. And then the community's like, but that's not what I need right now. Mm-hmm. You didn't listen to me, right? Like you didn't hear me out. Like I already have a way to handle that. And so even if you fixed it, I might still go about my ways of dealing how I was dealing with it before, because it wasn't my immediate need. So that's where that disconnect comes in, that it's not that the studies are necessarily wrong or that technical field, right? These people coming in there, they all have good intentions, and the data shows it. But, everyone they're human beings. Mm-hmm. And we have different priorities of what we need right away and what we're willing to change. Mm-hmm. And so that is the disconnect, right? We have to make sure that the people and whoever we're trying to help, one, want it, two, are ready for it, and that they're willing to put it in long term. And that's the thing. And so that's when we need to change that value of just valuing like technical skills, but we need to value, they call it soft skills, which I hate that word because they're not soft, but like listening to people, hearing what it is that really moves them and what they really want. And that's how it applies to individual, right? If you're a parent, if you're raising, you're raised kids, or if you have, other, friends and everything, right? We're always quick to give advice without listening to them first, right? It may be intellectually, they may know like, yes, you're right, I need that. But right now, I may not be ready for it, and
also what they want. It's not necessarily what they want. And, there's a good friend of mine, Mike, called Paul Cope, and he says that when someone's in that sort of headspace, it sends them, what do you need from me? Do you want me to listen or do you want me to give advice? So then you're saying to them like want versus need, because they may want like you to just listen, but they need that advice, but they don't actually want that advice right now. They just want to vent and someone to listen. So actually you ask, they'll give you the answer, and then you can sort of work from there. And it's honestly, it's fascinating you sort of mention that, because so many people are very quick to give the advice, and it's like, hold on a minute. Is that actually wanted?
Exactly. And so like, that's the connection with the international space, because even sometimes we don't have to go in with the solution. Sometimes it's just putting all those people in the same room and have them talk to each other and come up with a solution together. Sometimes it's not, we don't have to go in and solve everything for everyone. And I think that's that listening piece. And so that's what I was saying. That's that block, right? Because you're like taught like, well, my value is what I give, what I tell people. And And like exactly what you said, some people hesitate on just listening because they're like, what value am I giving to my friend if I just listen, right? I thought I have to give advice, but sometimes the value is just listening and providing that space.
There's something interesting that you hit on as well. Do you think that the reason why a lot of people feel unfulfilled is that their whole identity is based on the thing that they do? So, for example, you've got doctor in front of your name. So a lot of people can get very egotistical about that, or that they're a professor, or that they're earning I don't know £1 million a year, and that then becomes their identity, and they're associating themselves and what value they bring, rather than actually being as a human being and this spiritual being. Actually, it's this title. Do you think that's potentially why people do feel a bit unfulfilled and stuck?
Oh, definitely. It's definitely one of the things. And another one is like, it's related. It's that we're taught like to follow these check marks, a little package on what happiness brings, right? We're taught that happiness is based on like, we get a job, we get a house, we get married, right? We have children, all the little check marks, and I talk a lot about this in my book, like the American dream, and it's like a worldwide phenomenon, but we're not clones. Human beings, we're not clones. And so if you're taught like one package of happiness, when you start to feel that misalignment or like, I'm not happy, you start to feel that something's wrong with you. And so that's where the unfulfillment, because you're like, wait, I have all those things. So what am I? Am I ungrateful? I start to feel guilty. I should be happy because I have all that stuff, but I don't. And that's where like that unfulfillment is, because then it's like, but I did everything I was supposed to do. And then that leads to like that feeling of stuck, because then like, what do I do now? And then it's like that fear of, but if I do something about it, am I going to disappoint everyone? Because, you know what I mean? Because I did all that and I should feel amazing for it, but I don't, And so that's where that whole cycle comes in between unfulfillment, stuck, and also then blaming, right? You blame yourself for that feeling when it's actually pretty normal. We're all different. We all have our unique purpose and our own happiness formula, and it's not a package deal. There's not like, it's not like a check mark.
I love that as well, and it's almost like what sometimes I get my clients to say, and when I do when I speak in public, one of the things I'll say is, people say they want to be happy. I think every single person could fundamentally agree on a base level they want to be happy, and I'll go around the room if it's a small group and say, what does happiness mean to you? And the amount of times people say, I don't know. I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? Because you say you want to be happy, yet you don't know what happiness is to you. So then how are you ever going to get there, or how are you ever going to actually move towards it? And when you explain to people, it's like a light bulb's gone on. It's like, well, yeah, of course it makes perfect sense. But isn't that interesting how you sort of mentioned there? And I've had so many top-end executives like yourself, like just worked at the top of the field, and they were completely unfulfilled. Yet on paper, people would look and be like, well, you've got everything. But actually, it's not what brings you happy. And if your one of your core values is to spend time with your family, and actually having this really high-paying job takes you away from that, you're going to feel miserable. But people don't really understand that, do they?
Exactly. And I mean, and that's what I went through, like I had everything that you could, aspire to, right? The job even paid for like a huge house, kids, private school, everything, I had a package where you get a paid trip, right, to your home and everything. And I was miserable, even though there was parts of my work where, part of me could, come out in, there was a whole other part that was misaligned. And it's like, we don't have to live in misalignment. And that's the myth, right? We think we do, because we think that, stability, it comes at that price, but that's total BS. You know what I mean? And we can work on that. And that's something like I help my clients is really debunk that myth. You're not going to lose it all by going after, your happiness and your purpose. They can be together, and it's just like coming up with the plan to make it happen.
So when you first highlight that to clients, and I imagine you went through this yourself, it can be very scary. As you sort of mentioned, like it worked out really well for you, but you had this amazing job. Like on paper, people would potentially say that you're stupid to give that away. Like, why on earth would you give that away? And I'm sure you had that conversation with yourself. I've had it with myself when I've made a transition. And a lot of people get stuck in that fear and don't actually ever allow themselves to try something different. So can you explain how you work with your clients through that initial fear? Because you're saying to them, listen, you can have all this stuff here, but you've kind of got to let go of this. That's a very scary thing for a lot of people. So how do you actually work through that fear? Because I know there's a lot of people listening to this that can maybe relate to what you're saying. And they're like, I don't feel fulfilled in my job. I feel like there's something wrong, but I don't want to like lose everything. So how do you work through that fear?
Yeah, no, and it's really, really scary. I remember being like, I had a family, I have obligations, my parents, and it's really scary because you're like, there's realities, right? You're like, I need the health insurance, I need this, I need that. I can't just walk away. So what I tell my clients is like, I'm not telling you to walk away tomorrow. All right. So I think that's first is changing that mindset. We're not going to just like, you're going to run out of your house and be like, I abandon everything. No, it's about first, we're going to see how misaligned you are, right? I think sometimes we also think we're so far away from it that we think we have to make a whole drastic, 180. And it could be that, but it could also just be minor changes and repackaging of yourself, of your true self, right? Really putting out your true self. So what I tell clients is take a deep breath. We're going to create a plan. First, we're going to figure out what is your purpose? What is that moves you? Who are you? And the thing is, you've always been that person in one way or another. And we're going to like map it out to you all the times in your life where you have been this person. And then how do we match, right? What's always been in with you to your outside and create a strategic plan. Like most of the people I work with are all high achievers. So they love plans, like they're like, I'm going to create you a roadmap. It's going to have a plan. It's going to be step-by-step. And they're like, okay, I can handle a step-by-step plan. And it's going to map out. It could take a year. It could take 2 years. It could also be just 3 months. I've had some clients in 3 months. They were just like, okay, this will only take me that long and I can do it. And boom. Some people, it could take 2 years. It's very individual to you, but it's at the pace that you're comfortable. So if it's going to take you a little longer to make the transition, maybe you have some family stuff, it's okay, but it's coming, right? And we can make those incremental changes and you're going to see them and you're going to map it. So a lot of that's like reducing that anxiety that there is going to be a plan. It's going to be step by step. You're going to see it and it's not going to blow up your life. It's going to be incremental to what you're comfortable with. And I like to do that analogy where like life's a marathon in my opinion, right? It's not we're running, but the worst thing to do is to completely stop and start again, right? Instead, we can slow down and pace ourselves, but we're still heading right to that finish line that we want. So that's why like I tell my clients, we don't have to we don't have to sprint. We can take that pace. And if there's things that happen in your life that you need to slow down, that's great. But what matters is that we're making momentum so that you can live your true authentic self and have, if it's either that job or sometimes it's the relationship, sometimes it's changing their geographic location, right? It's very, personal to them. We do it at the pace that's comfortable to them, but we're still making progress.
And I love what you've said there. I don't interrupt there, but I've never heard anyone, my recollection again, I think I'm on 212 episodes of the podcast. I don't think I've actually had anyone say that you don't have to rush into it. Now, I know it's assumed, but I don't actually think I've had a guest that said outright, listen, you don't have to leave everything right now. And I think to actually have that plan for people, whether you're high achievers or not, but for people to just have that idea of like, right, I'm not there yet, but this is kind of where I'm going. Because I see a lot of people just like ships that just sat there bobbing along in the ocean. They're not really doing much. But as soon as you give them a bit of a course, they feel fulfilled because they know they're sort of moving somewhere. And again, things happen and it might not feel right. And you can kind of slowly feel your way into it. Whereas if you're going 100 miles an hour, it's very hard to course correct. So I love that you've said. I just want to really sort of clarify that. It's something that I don't think my audience has heard before from a guest. And as soon as you said it, I was like, this is a great way. Because obviously it makes perfect sense. And I think it's assumed that people can take it very literally of, right, I'm unfulfilled. I'm going to leave my job tomorrow. And then they're stuck there with bills to pay, family to support. And they're like, oh, I made a big decision here that didn't quite work out right. Can we just get a definition here about what alignment means? Because we mentioned it a few times. And I know you've kind of alluded to it, but can you have an actual definition of, we're talking about being in alignment. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, for alignment, it means that your actions are like reflecting who you are in the inside, right? That it's matching, So it's like a lot of times we show this other facade out to the world is we're scared, right, of people like judgment or maybe over time because we have been, people have basically criticized or told us that we can't be that, right? So we've suppressed it. And so it's really like one, matching your outside to what's really true inside and taking those actions every day that reflect more and more who you are. And then when you're in true alignment, means that you are who you are, right? On the outside or inside, and authentically you, regardless of what people think, regardless of what's going on in your life, you are showing that every single day and true to who you are.
I love this. You're just dropping like golden nuggets there. I'm loving this. So let's talk about the judgment then, because like I said, I really want to give my audience some like, actionable steps here as well, because like I said, and we'll talk about your book at the end. Because again, if this is the stuff that's in it, I think it's definitely something that people want to get. I've listened to a few of the audio clips that are on your Instagram as well, and it sounds fantastic. But let's talk about judgment, because as you sort of mentioned, and this was me from the majority of my life until I was about 28 years old, is that I basically was wearing a mask, being what other people wanted me to be. I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. Again, whether it's like you were in the career that your parents wanted you to be or whatever it is. So can we talk about judgment? Like, why do we fear judgment so much? Because fundamentally, I think that kind of is really what it is it? That if I show up as a true version of myself, people won't accept me. So where does that come into it all?
Yeah, no, it's scary because because when we have shown it, we have been hyper scrutinized, we have been put down, and we want to be accepted, we want to belong, we want to be part of a community. We're humans, and we want that sense. And so if in our past, what happens is that when we tried to show ourselves at some point in our life, right, someone rejected us, someone put us down, someone criticized what we were doing, and that hit us really hard, right? And so that maybe we felt left, maybe that meant feeling left out of a group and that. But the mindset shift is that you can change your circle, right? And also coming to accept that not everyone has to like you, and that's okay. We're not a one fit all for everyone. But I think that's the part that we then get stuck in, is that those little things have happened to us. And so then we think, oh, you know what? I'm just going to change myself or put that mask so that I can belong and I can make that other person happy and not uncomfortable. And so that way I'm just going to be what they want me to be, instead of, let me just change my circle and my environment and find people that are in alignment with me and attract to that. And that way I can be who I am. But that second step is what we struggle with. And so we end up like staying in the same place, same circles. And then we just like, oh, we're just going to mold. And then also we have a hard time with, it kind of leads into the boundaries and limits, like especially when it comes to family and people close to us, and maybe we can't escape those circles. We feel like, oh, well, you know what? I just need to manage this situation, or I have a hard time, telling them no if they're telling me to change. But that's all rooted in the same type of thing. We don't want them to reject us, take us away from those circles, and we want to feel validated. And it's like letting that go and being like, you know what? This is who I am. And instead of like struggling with like, I don't want to say no and have that conversation, it's like, you can just have a conversation about setting expectations. Like, hey, guess what? This is my new life now. I want you in my life. I love you. But if you can't, accept who I am, then let's think about our new relationship. But people really struggle with that second step.
It's like communication, isn't it? People struggle with that communication.
Yeah, they struggle with that communication of setting that initial expectation. And also, don't fear that if they say it, then that person's going to walk away. But guess what? If that person walks away, they were going to walk away at some point anyways, because that's your truth. That's who you are, and they're not accepting your true self. But it's that part is the hardest, right? And it's, once you like, what I like about when I work, and I did that work myself, right? I had that same thing. I was wore my suits, no color, didn't speak up for years, and I even I wear now tons of bracelets for every community like I visit, and they always mean something to me. And I still get criticism like, oh, those bracelets are really unprofessional, or like, you should be wearing this because it's, and I'm like, no, this is who I am. I love who I am. And you don't have to like it. But getting to that step, and that's what the listeners, it's recognizing it is really hard. But once like, my purpose, my legacy, I want to leave to the world, and this is my impact, you know what? That person doesn't have to understand, but someone else will. And other people will appreciate it, and you know who you are, and it's just living that freedom is everything.
I just want to validate what you're saying as well from my personal experience, like 100% what you've said there, is that when I made this shift myself and I was doing the work, I kind of became a bit of a recluse doing it. And it's very hard when you do that. So because you can remove yourself from the circles to do the work, but then at some point you're going to bump into your past. You're going to bump into it, whether it's family, because again, they're kind of always going to be there potentially. It's very hard to then show up as that new version of yourself if, as you mentioned there, you haven't understood that you're going to be faced with that. Because I think that's part of it. People go through this journey and then expect, oh, everyone's just going to accept this new version of me now. And they won't, because when you go back to that old circle, they're expecting you to show up as that old version of you. And then when you don't, they're the ones that freak out. They're the ones that feel uncomfortable. And then they want you to kind of go back and conform. And that can be quite scary. And I know myself, maybe you've been the same. When I first started out on this journey, I would go back to conforming again. And then when I would leave, I wouldn't feel great. I'd be sat in the car thinking, well, why have I done that? Why have I just defaulted back to my old setting? And I think it's to explain to people that it's okay, that it's a slow process and it doesn't make you a failure. And actually, it's just then, as you mentioned, reconfirming, but actually going in there with those intentions. And actually, you don't have to cut off all your friends. You can just slowly just move out of their life, which is essentially what I did. I just looked at some people like, you're really not in alignment with where I'm at right now. You're all take. You're not giving me anything much. So I just stopped messaging them. And guess what? They didn't message back. So they didn't message me. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. I always had to message you. You then were taken from me. Now I'm not messaging you. You haven't even asked to see how I am. So you can sort of go about it different ways, can't you? To just sort of distance yourself.
Exactly. And then as you start to realize, you start to be like, does this relationship serve me anymore? Right. And I think that's the thing too, that everyone's like, oh, every relationship needs to serve me forever. It's not true. It could just be that that was that life of that relationship. And then maybe that person is also growing. Doesn't mean it's forever. That person might come back later and be like, hey, I've had tons of that through my journey where at first everyone's like, no, like even we're distanced away every time I've made huge changes, like, this. And then I can tell you some of them have come around full circle and been like, you know what? I reflected on that 5 years later and I went through that. And then they reach out to me like, can we chat? I think I'm going through that now and I'm sorry I didn't understand before. So it's also having like empathy and compassion for the other folks too, that they're just not there yet. Maybe they're not ready for the growth and the change. And your change, it's more of a reflection of them. It's also like hitting them too, being like, do I need to change? Or that's reflecting like I wanted to stay the same and now you're making me uncomfortable. And so it's recognizing that everyone has their own journey and it may have nothing to do with you. And so sometimes you need to just walk away and let them go through their path and people will come and go. And it's like, it's if you start having, like for me, having that empathy for the other person, realizing they're going through their own thing, it's their, that uncomfortableness is reflective of them and they're not willing to deal with it yet. It's nothing to do with you and you live in your authentic self. You need to still be who you need to be.
So let's then talk about that then, becoming this true version of yourself and figuring out who we are. How do we first go about doing that? Because as you mentioned at the very start, and I know this myself as well, when someone first asked me to sort of do some of these exercises, I was a bit like, I've never asked myself this before. Like even yesterday, I went to a breath workshop, and went around doing the start. And one of the questions was, how are you feeling today? Now, bear in mind, I know all this stuff and I meditate and I check on myself quite regularly. And I hadn't checked in with myself yesterday. So when I was asked, how are you feeling? I was like, I don't actually know. And it kind of really threw me. And I think that's a lot of people as well. When you kind of ask them, well, who are you? They're like, oh, my name's Daniel. It's like, no, that's your name. That's not who you are. Oh, well, I'm a coach. No, that's what you do. That's not who you are. Well, I'm a man. No, do you know what I mean? And it's like when you try and get to like, who actually are you? People don't know, and it can be a very scary concept. So how do you go about that? How can listeners kind of go about those first steps of trying to figure out, well, then who actually am I?
Yeah, no, this is like something, it's interesting, same thing. Cause I always ask people to, when I first go with them, I'm like, what do you think purpose is? What is that to you? And I get all these different variety of answers. Like some people think it's the check marks. Oh, it's the next goal I'm trying to reach. Or like you said, oh, it's the next, it's who I aspire to be or something like that. And it's like, I have to sit back with them like, no, this is your compass of who you are and who you've always been, and so I have like these 8 steps and I tell people the first step I give to everybody is the most uncomfortable one is I tell them you have to start with death. And they're like, what do you mean? You have to start with death.
Ooh,
and I'm that. Like, you have to start with death. And it makes people really uncomfortable and confused. And I'm like, yes, the first exercise I'm going to have you do is write your obituary. And they're like, what? I'm like, yes, because I'm like, if you look at so much literature, people change their lives when they go through a death experience or near death experience or lose someone, because they're finally reflecting on their life and their end of their life. And so the first exercise is like, you died today, going to work, going to the grocery shop, and you're flying over your funeral. What are people saying? How do they feel about you? What was the impact you made? And I tell people, you have to start here, because that uncomfortableness is that sign for you. Have you been living your true self? Is how people remember you really you? Is the impact you've made really the impact you wanted to make, right? So it's starting with your legacy, which is it's one of the 8 pillars. Where are you? And this exercise, at first people are like, well, they struggle with it because they're like, well, I was a good sibling, a good friend. And I'm like, okay, no, we need to go deeper than that. Who were you? What were you remembered for? And then like reaching out to some folks, like some close people, what is the impact you've made on their life, right? And then you realize nobody said your title. Nobody said man, woman, your title, any of that stuff you mentioned, right? They talked about how you made them feel, what they came for you for, and it's like things that we forget about because we value all these other things that we forget. Oh, wow. I was a connector, I've been a good listener, or I've been, I've changed, yeah, I think I've changed that person's life. But the part where, then I have them like, but the part that they're left empty is like, oh, but they didn't see this part of me, this part of me that I've wanted, or I didn't get to do this, and I didn't get to, show them this. I'm like, okay, well, that's the first step, right? First step is realizing where are you now? And the things like people don't want to face death because it's scary and all those things, but we're humans. It's life. It's coming, and do you want to continue living a life that's masked, or do you want, when you die, for it to be that I was who I was, and this is how, I'm remembered for who I am. So that's like where I tell people to start, is reflect on that. As uncomfortable as it is, as dark as it is, it gives you that insight of at least that starting point of a little bit of that misalignment. And then you can but the thing is that what's great about it is that you're alive today, right? So you can rewrite it. You start with rewriting it. What do you want them to say? What do you want to be? How do you want to live? And what do you want to remember for? And then a lot of them are like, I still don't really know. And that's okay. We're going to park it. Now we're going to go into, let's go back to your childhood. What was your dream then? What were the characteristics of the dream? And a lot of people are like, I want to be a doctor. No. Let's dig into that, because 5 people can answer, I wanted to be a doctor, but the characteristics of what you saw in that doctor are all different. One person might want to be a doctor because they help people. Another person wanted to be a doctor because they get to spend some time like completely like in silence and really fixing something like detailed. Other people want to be a doctor because they get to meet different people every day. So it's so different, right? So it's like less about like the title of your childhood dream, but what was that characteristic of it? Who do you admire today? What characteristics do they have? And then like you dig deeper, because a lot of people are like, well, purpose is what I love. No, actually what you love is only one of the 8 pillars. It's only one. There's your childhood dream, your legacy, what you want people to seek you for, where you can teach the world, what have you overcome? And what are you going to keep overcoming? Because what you've overcome, guess what? That's going to repeat in your life. And that tool set that you used to overcome it, you're going to need that throughout your whole life. And that tells you something, right, about yourself, right? And so how can you look at that and go, why do I keep overcoming that? What have I used for that? Those tool sets are unique for you, And so how did I do that? And then like, if you were given, I have another one that's like, what's the impact you want to make to the world, right? So if you were given all the money in the world, what problem would you solve? That's the lens of how you want to impact this world every day, right? So all those 8 things, they come together, and people can read this in detail in my book, but you can do these exercises and you learn so much about yourself, and you learn like, oh, these are all these things. And that whole intersection is what moves you every day. That's your
Mm.
purpose. That's your North Star. People think of purpose as a destination. No, your legacy is the destination, but your purpose is what moves you every day. Why are you on this earth? What's that gift that you bring to this place every single day? And how can you integrate that in your everyday? So even when I mentioned earlier about that strategic plan, 2 years, already people who start this, once they know that, they already start feeling better after a week because they are integrating that purpose in their everyday lives. So it becomes less about when I'm going to make that 100% change, because I'm already feeling better every day.
And I think for me,
so I'm enjoying it.
It's about the growth as well, isn't it? So you talk about that destination. It's like actually who you become along that journey. And I think one of the biggest realizations for people listening to this, and again, they go through these exercises or exercises like this, is the fact that people don't realize they can change.
Yeah, exactly.
They look back at their lives, as you mentioned, and they'll look back and there's the same patterns that keep cropping up. And it's like, if you don't learn the lessons from it, the universe is going to keep sending them to you.
Exactly.
And it's just understanding that actually you can change. But as you mentioned, people aren't sure on how to change. Well, it's like, okay, the world outside of you is not going to change unless you internally change. And the only way you internally are going to change is being like, okay, well, who do I actually want to become? Because you've only become the person that you are today through the thoughts you've kept on thinking. It's just a habit of thought. The habit of thought have made you who you are today with your characteristics. Change the thinking, repeat it, and then guess what? Your life changes. And I know it sounds very simple. It's not, but it's simple. It's just not easy to do. But people just don't realize they can do it. They think, well, this is my lot. I'm 30, whatever it is, years old, and I'm going to be stuck like this forever. It's like, that's not actually the case. Like, you can actually empower yourself. And I love the fact you mentioned there about going back to childhood and being like, well, what job did you want to be? But again, because I've never heard this either, but it's not what job, why? What were the characteristics you liked about that? That was, again, as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting, because mine was I wanted to be a fireman or a police officer, and both of them were because they help people. So that was really interesting. And then also we mentioned about current people you admire. Why do you admire them? What is it about that? And I think that's so interesting to be like, wow, I actually value that in other people because I value it in myself, but I'm not actually expressing that. I think it's a fantastic way of looking at it.
And that you can, and that guess what? You can be that person you admire. Right. And so what do we do to become that? Right. And then that can be folded back into that legacy rewrite of your obituary. So I think it's like, it's a lot of those like exercising that mindset, like exactly what you said, that shift, that you can do that. And you don't have to have those crazy dips anymore. Right. Growth is not like a straight line, right? It's like this, it's like a curvy, well, people don't see it's like an up and down, but slight, right? But we don't have to have these crazy, like, down, up, down, up, down, up. We can actually learn, like I said, from our mistakes and prevent them, right? Our toolkit that we used before, we can integrate that in our everyday so that we don't go on these crazy dips and that we're constantly moving forward to who we want to be, and it has to be intentional, I think it's less that it is hard, but I think the hardest part is sticking to it and being intentional, and being like, I'm not going to go to sleep tonight. Every night, I'm going to make sure I do something, that's true to me and it's intentional, and then it's moving me, and it's like that commitment. That's the hardest part, because it only needs to be a small thing, but it's like sticking to it.
And that's what I say to people, that because when you first start learning some of the stuff, you can be super motivated. And after a while, that motivation wears off. And that's where you've got to become disciplined. And again, keep reminding yourself about well, why are you on this journey? Why are you doing it? And the thing I was actually going to speak to you about, and you kind of touched on it there, is to make that identity shift is really hard because people want to hold on to the life that they've got now. So they want to carry on doing their bad habits and all that sort of stuff, but have this new life. How do you kind of transition them out of that? I kind of know we've kind of alluded to it, but I kind of just want to make sure we have the thing, because people, and again, people I've worked with, they're like, yeah, but I still want to carry on doing this, even though it's not really serving them. Or they'll carry on with the journey. They'll start to make good progress, but then they'll miss certain things of their old life. And it's very easy, as you sort of mentioned, to just slowly start to dip in a bit. It's almost like an alcoholic. Like if you have that one drink, before you know it, you're back having 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's like, how do you coach through that actually identity shift so that you are cementing in this new version of you and not going back to that safe comfort zone?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's why it's so individual, right? So like in that question, like what has helped you before? It's like that toolkit is intentionally putting it in your schedule, right? So let's say like if reading books always helped you, we're going to put that in your schedule. Or let's say like celebration has always helped you, we're going to put it in. When you ask people like, what do you love to do? The thing is, like in our society, we're so into instant gratifications, right? And so we give ourselves everything we want to do right away. Or when we procrastinate, we start doing the things that we love to do, but then that gets like, I don't know, shadowed with feelings of guiltiness because, oh, we should be working on this other thing, right? And so then we start associating, and creating it a bad habit. My whole thing is like, we don't have to make them bad habits anymore. Instead, we're going to structure your life in your day where you're going to work on the thing that's going to move you. And then you're going to reward yourself with the thing you love. You're going to reward yourself with the procrastination. That's going to take away the nasty feelings about it. And then you're going to love it. And then you're going to feel good about doing those things, right? So instead of being labeled, right, as a bad habit, it's going to be a great habit because you got that and you got that reward from doing the work that you needed to do. And then we're going to celebrate it along the way and give yourself that positive reinforcement. So a lot of times we end up going like, we need to do this and all these steps, but then we don't stop to celebrate it. And we don't stop to celebrate it with others. And then we're not sharing it with other people, what we're doing, right? So I always tell people, you got to pick 5 people in your life, 5 champions, I like to call it, right? These are the people that you can go through everything, right? And they're going to support you regardless. And they know who you really are. Those are the 5 people you're going to share this journey with and be like, let's celebrate together. Let's do this together. You're going to share with them what you're going through. And you have to make sure they're champions and not your naysayers.
Yep.
But they're going to help you also keep it along. And then you can encourage each other. Even to this day, I have my 5 people and I have it intentionally that we meet once a week, 20 minutes. But that helps you keep like going and keeps like reinforcing the good habits. Because the thing is, they know you. They know what's your bad habits before. They know what's going. They know what you want to do in their frustration. So they're going to want to encourage you on this way to make the changes. That's also going to help them in your relationship.
And as accountability as well, isn't it? It keeps you accountable. Like yes. if you've set those intentions to yourself, and actually these people, and I love what you said there as well, making sure they actually are your champions. And it's very easy to find out who is and who isn't your champion. And what I mean by that is when you start to compromise, do they accept that compromise? Like, oh yeah, that's okay. Because again, I've had this before when I was working with a lot of fat loss clients, is that their partner would say that oh yeah, I love the fact you've lost 20, 30 pounds. But as soon as they start to compromise, their partner, oh, it's okay. And then before you know it, that one compromise becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 4, becomes 5. Fundamentally, what's happening is their partner didn't like the fact of actually they were doing better than them, making themselves not feel great. They were getting loads of attention, whatever it is. And then their own insecurities, their own jealousies came in. So then they were almost secretly sabotaging, not necessarily intentionally, but was on a subtle subconscious level. And again, because we kind of want to be accepted, going back to what we said earlier on, we're like, oh, it's okay for me to have this. And again, the reason why I say this is because when it comes to celebrating, I definitely think it's a massive thing to do. But do you also think some people can celebrate too much and then actually take their foot off the gas?
No, definitely. Yeah. You can't have, and it has to be like I think I was mentioning to you, on a reward basis, right? Like it has to be, you put in some work and you do a celebration that's healthy for you, right? If that's why it's really important to look at that overcome and what has helped you, right? Because if you have overcome alcoholism, you're not going to put that as your reward, have a drink, right? It's like, you know what I mean? What has helped you is something else, so that's why I say it's always, unique to that person and to that person's situation. And it has to be like the tools that helped you lift yourself up, not put you in that same spiral again. Right. And that's going to be to everyone else, right? There could be someone who's, baking could be a reward for someone, but for someone maybe going through eating disorders, it's not going to be. Right. So it has to be really tailored. You really want to focus on like the tools that helped you before, get out of things and that put you in a healthy place. Those are going to be your celebration tools. Sometimes, like I said, you just link to what you procrastinate on, but it could be, if it's unhealthy, if what you've overcome is like really bad habits of procrastination and doing very negative things, that's not going to be part of the things that you're using in your celebration chart, right? And hopefully your champions will keep you on that. And, and I do get to this question sometimes about like, I don't have any champions right now. And guess what? That's okay. There's a whole virtual world of communities, you know what I mean? And so there's, I remember when I first, I had dedicated my life, right, to international development, and all my community was around that. And so when I was leaving that, none of them could understand why I would leave that world. They felt it betrayal. And it's not necessarily they weren't my champions, but they couldn't understand it at that moment. And so they couldn't be my champion then. So I had to first go and find entrepreneur networks, because I was like, that is where my calling is. That's where I want to go. And so I started joining like women's groups online and, meeting and having one-on-one meetings until I found people that were aligned with the same vision and built that relationship. and they became my champions, right? But they weren't there before. But there's a whole massive world of communities, of networks. You're not alone. So people are like, but I feel alone. I don't belong anywhere. I don't think anyone's like me. That's not true. There's all sorts of people that share your same interests and passion and vision and mission. And it's just finding it and putting yourself out there and looking for them and meeting people. And it takes some time, but you can find it. And it's okay if it doesn't exist for you right now. You can build it, and they will come.
It's even if it's like the most quirky, weird thing. Like people, like even if it's butterflies, like your thing is you love butterflies.
Yeah, exactly.
There's like butterfly communities out there where people can just geek out on butterflies. And I say this when I go into school as well, because again, school for me, and again, a lot of people wasn't a great time. And what I say to them is like, your uniqueness is actually what sets you apart. But actually at school, as you mentioned before, you almost feel you've got to hide it. But actually, whatever your quirkiness, your weirdness is, there's people out there just like you. And actually, like for me, like, again, I'm not sure if you follow soccer, but my soccer team is Aston Villa. And it's only recently that I realized like how many Aston Villa fans there actually are, because before, when I was at school, I was the only one. So I kind of felt like a bit of an outsider and a bit of a weirdo. So I didn't tend to tell people that I supported them. It was almost like not shame or anything, it's a soccer team. But actually, when you find out, oh, wow, no, there is more people out there like this, same with computer games and all that sort of stuff. It's actually, there's people out there. And I love the fact you've said this. I really, really love that, is the fact of you may not have people in your life. Again, it could be your partner's not very supportive or your friends, whatever, but there's a whole virtual world now, especially with what happened the last couple of years. Like for all of its negatives, the positive of it is actually a lot more things went online, and they don't actually cost money. A lot of these things, like to meet up, yes, you can have the entrepreneur things where you've got to pay a small fee to get in, but some of them, there's free just meetups,
free. There's so many free.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anything, and even like things you're overcoming. Like there's groups for I'm on one highly sensitive, ambitious women group.
Yes.
Anything like sensitive, and you can have anxiety. There's you can find people that are even like have overcome similar things to you, that you have a bonding. It could be anything. And so there are tons of free communities, free networks, and the thing is, as human beings, we're all longing for community and belonging. And so, it's, I tell people they have to like expand, it doesn't have to even be in your same country. I have champions on the other side of the world, and we just like match our time zones and chat.
Yeah, I love it. Even right now. So whereabouts are you right now?
I'm in the Dominican Republic. Where are you?
I'm in the UK. I'm in England. So let's say right now we're connecting on the other side of the world, but that's the interesting thing. It's like you don't have to just be limited to that small little community you're in, whether it's in America, UK, wherever you are. Like that, we get very got of this town that I'm in. That's all there is. It's actually no. Exactly. Just take get yourself in a hot air balloon. Just look up a bit. There's a whole big world out there. Like just go and explore. And maybe you are scared to travel. Okay, but just go online virtually. There's people out there. And again, English tends to be a common language that most people can speak. So actually, you've got that common ground. Especially if it's a specific group, like you mentioned about highly sensitive people. You're not alone. Like, and you can get resources like books, like lectures, all this stuff. Even YouTube. Like for me, it's like just resources out there where you realize, wow, I'm not the only one with this problem. Other people have gone through it, and I can actually overcome it as well. I think it's such a key thing. Now, just to wrap this up, I want to talk about your book. So your book, I'm not sure if it's come out yet, but it's coming out. It's called Creating Your Limitless Life. Like, can you talk to me about like what actually made you write this book and what's the aim of it?
Yeah. So it comes out September 15th, which I'm super excited for. So the aim is that, one of the things I saw was that the missing piece for me and like my impact and my legacy is I want everyone to be able to have these tools. So I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in the US, and I couldn't afford, when I was like younger, coaching or anything like that, but I could afford a book. And I remember going to the library and being able to read different books. And that's what opened my mind, and changed my life, right? I could read about different things and different places. And I would dream of like traveling, like travel is a big part of my self-care. And I could dream of different places, and like, at different pivotal times in my life where I felt stuck and unfulfilled, I could pick up these timeless pieces and read them again and get clarity. And so for me, I was like, I need to, I have these tools, right? From working all around the world in different communities and, and people, and like, I can help people figure out, and I know it works, the purpose. I need to share this with the world in a way that it's accessible to everyone. Anyone who wants to figure out what their purpose is, get some clarity, get some insight, they can just pick up my book, and it's all in there for them. They don't have to work one-on-one with me. It doesn't need to be exclusive. That's one of the things I didn't like about academia. That was just for these only certain people. This is for everyone. And so for me, that was my mission in writing this book, like, putting that information out for the whole world, for anyone, any cross of life, any economic, class, any age, right? You can be a teenager to, 70, 80s years old. It's never too late and it's never too early. You can pick this up and discover yourself. And because I honestly believe that if people could live their authentic self, live with purpose, our world would have less problems because people would be happy, fulfilled, bringing their value and gifts and uniqueness to this world, and just things would just be better and less depression and anxiety. And so that was my motivation in writing this. And so, I hope, I've already seen it with my reviewers that, they've been like, wow, this like really impacted and changed me. And I've made this shift and that's what I want. I want this to be like this movement, this change in conversation in our world. This change the narrative, no more cookie cutter. Let's be who we are, bring it out.
I love as well, because we didn't touch on your upbringing as well, about being an immigrant, like,
Yeah.
because that by itself as well, it's almost like that rags to riches story. Like you weren't brought up, from what I imagine, like with like loads of money, wealth and stuff like that. So people listening to you now, again, you're very well presented. Again, you're a doctor. I think your husband's a professor. Like, so you've got this amazing family on paper. You look at your Instagram and you think, wow, this person clearly was brought up in privilege. But actually, what you're saying is no, like, you've learned these tools along the way. So no matter where you are in life, not necessarily the age or gender, but like, no. Like, no matter what your economic status, like, all this stuff is accessible to you as well. And I love the fact that books like help change your life as well, because that's why I've got so many books. I literally got a whole bookshelf over there. Like, books are incredible. And I wish more people understood the power of books, because YouTube's great, don't get me wrong. But honestly, if you can really get into a book, you've got all the information right there. So again, we didn't touch into your upbringing. That's probably a whole podcast episode by itself. But and again, I don't know why I didn't touch on it at the start. But for me, like, what specifically, again, just to wrap this up, I'm very curious. What information do you think? I've never asked this question before, but it just pops into my head. When you were growing up, again, immigrant upbringing, what information do you have now do you wish that you had then, that would actually help speed things up for you?
One, that it's possible that you can do it. I think, and the book, I go into all my struggles, from like, we immigrated from Nicaragua during a civil war, worked up, grew up in a working class, immigrant neighborhood. And, and I even talk about, like, a lot of times I didn't even eat lunch because I wanted to sit with certain circles and I wanted to move ahead. But I think it was that I didn't have to compromise my true self on the way. And I did, I did. And I talk about all that, like, I thought the only way to be able to get out of the situation I'm in and to help my family, because that was my big motivator then, like, I was like, I really want to give my parents back and help my community and just get out and, make a difference. And I think I thought that I had to compromise who I was, and so I did, I stayed silent. I just like put my head down. It's like the immigrant thing, and just put my head down and worked and worked and worked. And I think, like, I wish I knew then that, I didn't have to do that. I could have still, I had to go through my journey, right? So I still probably would have gone through those check marks and the whole thing, but I could have done it more authentically. And I wish I would have known that you have value and gifts without those check marks to the world, and you don't have to devalue them. And I talk a lot about like being a woman and like going through these process, going up the economic and career ladder, everything, like how much I suffered and went through. But a lot of it was from silencing myself and that voice. I let myself get bullied. I let all these things, and I had a role in that, because I didn't learn to value who and the gifts I bring to the world till much later, So in my book, I have this dedication page, to myself, up on the beginning that says, to my 16-year-old self that almost gave up. So I think if I were to go back, it would be to that person and be like, don't give up. You have this gift, and don't dim your light. And so
no, one big thing that I say to myself is that I'm enough. I've got to keep it as a constant reminder for myself that I'm enough. It's something that I wish I'd told myself a lot earlier on, that I'm enough. And like you said, it's and like I said, you mentioned a whole host of things there, by the way, like being within the corporate world and all this sort of stuff you do. Like literally, we could have spoke about any number of your things.
Yeah.
Like, but I was like, I wanted to like make it relevant to your book as well, and again, add a lot of value to my audience, which you absolutely have. My final question, which I ask all my guests, is, what advice would you give to someone right now that's listening that does feel lost, stuck, and out of control of their life right now? I know we've covered a lot on this, so whether you want to summarize it or bring in another point, like what advice would you give to someone right now that does feel a bit lost and stuck?
I would say that there's hope, and that you can change. And like, and I know we touched upon it, that it doesn't have to be tomorrow or later, but really, really, like, I've been there and I know what that's like. And you can change your life and be limitless. And it starts with you first believing that it could happen for you and that you deserve it. So I think a lot of that is that, like they feel that they don't, like I felt that way, that you don't deserve it. And guess what? You do deserve it, and you do deserve it. You can change, you can have it. And so it's first believing and saying out loud, I am limitless. I do deserve it. I believe it can happen. And just switching that and believing that, then you're ready to just take the first step.
Honestly, this has been a genuinely incredible conversation. I love your energy. The value that you've given my audience has been fantastic. Where can people find out more information about you? If they want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to reach out?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account, b.act.change, and a lot of that is like, because my stuff is like, be yourself, act, do the action, right? Change the world, So you can follow me on Instagram, and I'm also on LinkedIn under my name, Esther Zeldon. And then you can also, I have a website, www.beactchange.com.
Amazing.
So
I'll get Mikey.
Any of those, you can find me. And I know people prefer different platforms, but I'm there, and you can DM me. I'm very accessible. So, I love community. So I'm just happy to just connect and build this movement.
I love that. I'll get Mikey to put all the stuff across the bottom, and also it'll be in the show notes as well. Dr. Esther, honestly, thank you very much for your time today. It's been absolutely incredible, and I really appreciate all the value that you give my audience today.
No, thank you so much. This was amazing.